Yu Yu Hakusho is one of those classics that no matter how many times you approach it, it always has new enjoyable aspects to appreciate. And this should speak for itself, considering how much Yu Yu Hakusho analysis still garners attention, and why you clicked on this video. Today, interest might even be higher in the series, considering the live-action adaptation coming out on Netflix. Regardless of said adaptation's quality, the marketing around it is attracting new people that are binging the original anime for the first time. And old fans alike are going back and rewatching, only to be reminded of how Yu Yu Hakusho is truly an endless fountain of entertainment. So, the purpose of this video is to provide an analysis of what did and did not work in Yu Yu Hakusho, running through every saga and making comparisons between the manga and anime. Once I was asked which I preferred, the anime adaptation or reading the original manga, to which I responded that to pick one or the other rather misses the point. The anime adaptation and the manga of Yu Yu Hakusho both expand on each other in necessary ways. Separating the two doesn't really accomplish anything, besides reducing the enjoyment of the other. For those who aren't aware, the Yu Yu Hakusho manga is significantly shorter than the anime's runtime would suggest. Following the shonen adaptation rule as put forward in Ember Review's video, that being 2 chapters for every 1 episode, it would logically follow that the manga would have a length of almost 300 chapters. Instead, the manga has a mere 175 chapters in comparison to the 112 episodes of the anime. As you can extrapolate, the Yu Yu Hakusho anime has a large amount of filler, expanded content, and even some character arcs that weren't present in the manga. On top of all of that, the anime also cuts out large swaths of content from the manga that expands on the story themes in ways both minor and major. While usually the term filler causes most anime fans to groan with displeasure, Yu Yu Hakusho is rather an exceptional case. Almost all of the added content only serves to further Yoshihiro Togashi's vision of the story. Almost all of it anyways. After reflecting on the themes and ideas of Yu Yu, I can't help but notice where the anime occasionally adds too much content, or otherwise misinterprets the trajectory of the narrative. The game for me becomes a rather messy process of determining what anime content should be cut, revised, reinterpreted, to make for the optimal viewing experience. And that's what I'm here to do today. In effect, we are going to be examining both texts under a microscope, and creating a context to ultimately enjoy Yu Yu Hakusho to its fullest, throughout which I will be highlighting where the anime missed a few swings, and where it knocked it into the solar system. Setting the stage. Back from the grave once again. Perhaps the most important part of viewing Yu Yu Hakusho is having an express understanding of the central theme of the story. Pinning down such a theme is shockingly harder than it sounds. What gives Togashi's work such life is something almost intangible for outsiders looking on. The most powerful ability Togashi has in his arsenal is cohesion, brought on by experience and appreciation for all aspects of life. It's an idea directly touched on in the cooking section of the Hunter exam in Hunter x Hunter. That things which you might consider trivial or mundane in nature are in fact things that which people dedicate their entire lives to mastering, for that joy alone. This sort of appreciation for life can be seen most prominently in the ways Hunter x Hunter goes about conveying its messages. Whether it's cooking, Togashi's love of video games, referencing famous artworks, creating a logical puzzle, or even appraising objects, Togashi dives deep into many different subject matters, learning what makes them tick and what people love about them, then uses that knowledge to elevate his own work. I tell you all of that to put into context the theme of Yu Yu Hakusho in greater detail. Because of Togashi's appreciation for life, it can seem like pinning down the themes of his stories are difficult, as the specific focus seems to shift from place to place. But if in fact you take a more broad view, the scope becomes more grand and clear. If the themes of Hunter x Hunter is an appreciation for life, then the themes for Yu Yu Hakusho, which would logically predate it, is coming back to live your life after losing everything. While Yu Yu's subject matter can almost seemingly show the tendency to bounce from one theme to another, this is the prevailing idea that ties together every major character, from Yusuke to his friends, to Toguro and Genkai, to Sensui to Yomai. Keep this theme in mind, as it will be the main thing informing my decisions of what I praise, alter, or cut from the Yu Yu Hakusho anime. Alteration 1. The Daily Life of Yusuke the Ghost. I have a confession. I love daily life shonen arcs. One unique trend in shonen manga, because of their previously long run lengths, is to shift genres, usually from gag manga or slice of life to action. Yu Yu proved to also have this happen. However, all the interesting side stories that existed in the beginning volumes of the manga were almost immediately cut from the anime without anything even close to a mention. Daily life arcs carry a unique quality, particularly in shonen, being that they are investment-based, low-tension arcs. Given that many people generally come to shonen manga for high-intensity storytelling, daily life arcs offer a unique time for the author to build more personal traits and connections between the world, characters, and readers, all while expanding on the themes in a low-stakes way. For these reasons, daily life arcs carry with them the interesting tendency to be only truly appreciated in retrospective. For a more in-depth example of this happening, I recommend reading Lethargic Ramblings' Defense of the Daily Life arc of Hitman Reborn. My point here being is that these early chapters do a large amount of the legwork to establish who Yusuke Urameshi is, and what his habits are, and how his relationship with others work and affect him. For those who maybe have not read Togashi's other manga, it is really important to know that he is a very experienced author. He's incredibly skilled at making all sorts of stories, and is honestly a master of multiple genres. Hence why we just call him Togashi in this house. As such, my first change to Yu Yu is just to get these chapters animated. In my personal opinion, if you are a fan of Yu Yu Hakusho, you really do owe it to yourself to read these chapters, and cry, laugh, and be happy, because they are just gems. Chapter 4 about how Yusuke helps a little boy who lost his dog cope and pick himself up will leave you misty-eyed every time. However, another thing the daily life arc of Yu Yu did was really establish the ins and outs of Yusuke's golden egg trial. And the details of this trial will lead me directly into the first of my few controversial opinions on the Yu Yu Hakusho anime. Alteration 2.
Select your character.
Pachinko machines, fighting games, and Goblin King. Perhaps one of my shortest and least interesting edits, I will admit. But nevertheless, I want to address it now, before we get too deep into the complexities of Yusuke Urameshi as a person and the later arcs. Throughout both the early chapters of Yu Yu Hakusho and at various points of the story, we get scattered scenes of Yusuke sitting down at arcades or pachinko machines. However, between the anime and the manga, the details get rather muddled. In the manga, we are shown scenes of Yusuke either gambling away his cash at the pachinko machines or indulging in fighting games at the arcade. But in the anime, despite the fact that Yusuke is a delinquent, doing delinquent things, they could actually not show him gambling because he's underaged. Instead, the anime opted for a third option, and instead gave us scenes of Yusuke playing the titular video game, Goblin King, which would become an important plot point to the Chapter Black arc with the introduction of Game Master. Now, of course, this is hardly even a major detail, and in the long run is less important than most things. However, the fact that Yusuke only plays fighting video games is something I consider to be an important point of characterization. By changing his gaming habits, you inadvertently change small aspects of Yusuke's characters in ways that just aren't him. So my change for this section is to just imagine whenever Yusuke is seen playing Pachinko or Goblin King, just mentally amend that to a fighting game. My reasoning for such a minor and unimportant edit goes rather deep. Now before I continue, I want to say that I loathe using this word to describe just about anything. Mostly because it's a buzzword, talking point people use to praise things they barely understand, and thus muddy the waters around the discussion. But I see no other word to describe him, so here it goes. Yusuke Urameshi is one of, if not the most complex anime characters ever written. By complex, I don't mean by pretentious meanings as usual, like just being difficult to understand, or dealing with deep issues or motivations. No, what I mean by complex is that Yusuke legitimately just has many different drives, all conflicting and colliding within him at any given time, much like an actual person. Most characters in general are usually defined by one or two events, drives, or goals. For some short examples, think of, say, Guts from Berserk. I've seen many people claim he's a complex character, but really you can reduce his motivations down to a simple love and revenge if you want to be short about it. Try for another character like Vash the Stampede, who simply wants to avoid violence and be a pacifist. It's a fairly straightforward motivation. This isn't to say that their plights aren't given a significant amount of weight, but they are more what I would describe as deep instead of complex. In contrast, Yusuke has many faces that he must consider wearing, because he has many desires that come into direct conflict. Yu Yu Hakusho is at its core a story about Yusuke exploring each of these desires and choosing between them. He never rejects them outright, but as the story goes on, he deprioritizes them, as he hones in closer and closer to finding his life's calling. Yusuke is torn between the things he loves. He has to repeatedly choose, am I Yusuke the violent thug, Yusuke the hero, Yusuke the fighter, or Yusuke the whipping boy of Keiko? As summarized by a wonderful anime oi line at the beginning of the Three Kings arc, Genkai states to the group,
And as he's discovered, sometimes the more you see, the less clear things become. Yusuke thought he knew it all. He thought he was just some dime-a-dozen punk. But the more he learns about himself, the more confused he gets. I think we owe it to him to allow him the chance to fumble around in the darkness for answers. Because the truth of it is, we can't stop his demon blood from causing him to do wrong. We just have to have faith. Is that too much to ask, Kuwabara?
When I say the anime dialogue does wonders for the story, I truly mean it. To bring it back to center, this is why I propose you change the very scenes of Yusuke goofing off gambling or playing Goblin King to him playing fighting games. It reinforces the idea that he has found something that he loves, and doesn't want to give up. Fighting is one of the ways Yusuke connects to the world around him. He and Genkai even have several scenes of them just playing fighting games together, and him getting his ass kicked. While you could keep the Pachinko machines, they only really exist to reinforce the idea that Yusuke is also a punk, and old habits die hard. But considering that if you're watching Yu Yu Hakusho and either listening to his hilariously foul language in English...
He what?! I've planned a formal meeting to... Earth the toddler, bitch! You better speak now before I forever put that pacifier 10 inches down your throat!
Or just watching his quick temper in general, I think his punk nature comes across well enough. Naturally, we'll discuss Yusuke's motivations and mask as we go deeper into the arcs. But let us move on to the last alteration for part 1. Alteration 3. Koenma is not our friend. After going through Yu Yu Hakusho, I come to what is likely my most controversial opinion, not only to you all, but also to myself, as I'm split right down the middle with how to interpret Koenma between the anime and manga version. My overarching opinion on our Hell Warden pacifier friend is that the anime completely missed what Koenma's representation was meant to do for the story and Yusuke entirely. It becomes a decision that inevitably has rippling effects outwards to later developments and themes of the narrative. In exchange for that, however, the anime turned Koenma into a thoroughly enjoyable character that is hard to imagine the series without as portrayed in the anime. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Why do I have this opinion in the first place? As always, let's return to our base theme, Yusuke's theme of coming back to life and learning to live again. In the Yu anime adaptation, Yusuke at the beginning is given a golden egg by Botan and Koenma that houses Pooh, and told that the more good deeds he does, the more positive energy the egg will accumulate. When hatched, if the beast will be good, it will lead Yusuke back to his body. If bad, the beast will eat him. Thus, this explanation sets up the road ahead for Ghost Yusuke. In all honesty, this works more or less the same as it does in the manga, except with a huge glaring key difference. In the manga, knowledge of how the egg hatches are expressly hidden from Yusuke. He is not told that he has an express chance of dying from this egg hatching, and it's for a good reason. At the beginning of the series, Yusuke Urameshi is not a bane or a boon to the spirit world, or society in general. If anything, given his prior behavior, Yusuke should probably be sent to hell regardless. It was only by chance that he died too soon, before anyone expected him to. Given this, why would Spirit World tell him the details of his trial? When not telling Yusuke that he needs to be good, thus coerce him into being good, Yusuke could very well have had a mind to play along, do good deeds, and then continue to be a high school punk after revival. It's this logic that keeps the secret of the golden egg from being revealed from Yusuke. They want to measure his pure, uncovered actions. What you should be understanding from this is that the Spirit World and Koenma are not explicitly on friendly terms with Yusuke. I make this clear because despite how much of Koenma's commentary we get in the anime, during this opening arc, after Koenma hands over the egg, he's barely heard from again. Not a lovable funny cast of the gang, or a constant secondary narrator of the plot, but an entirely neutral and mostly uninvested judge, continually evaluating Yusuke's actions. These two portrayals of Koenma, one of him being a friendly and sarcastic ruler, and one of him being a judgmental, enigmatic figure, run rather contrary to each other. However, this is where it goes from playful interpretation to thematically harmful. Why? Let's return to the main theme in Yusuke's early state. Let us pass over the obvious descriptors of Yusuke's character that we are all familiar with. Punk kid, loves fighting, bad parents, borderline abusive teacher figures. There are several odd tellings that Yusuke's heart and body are not in line, which gradually become more clear in the daily life arc, and ultimately becomes the reason that Koenma decides to put Yusuke back into his body prematurely and permanently, until Pooh hatches and decides to eat him or not. In the manga daily life arc, Yusuke spends basically all of his time helping out random people and spirits to either live their lives, accept passing and grief, or being a good friend to them. Now to us the audience, who have mostly seen only Yusuke's good parts, this is most familiar. and to be expected. The inciting incident of Yu Yu is Yusuke making a child smile and then attempting to save his life. However, those are but mere sparks of humanity in the eyes of the spirit world, who, as can be seen in their attitude and classification of Yusuke, have already written him off as a punk kid with a penchant for violence and gambling. Yusuke may be a punk with a heart of gold, but he doesn't show it with his material everyday actions, which is what the spirit world judges. Perhaps one of the most important roles Keiko plays in this narrative is being to anchor us to her and Yusuke's past experiences, and to ensure to us that Yusuke was always a good person, if only to Keiko. To the spirit world, and by that I mean to Koenma, Yusuke's behavior appears to be entirely erratic. When he's in his body, he seems to only indulge in violence and other sins like gambling. When out of his body, Yusuke hardly even seems to give his vices a thought, as he throws himself into other people's problems in order to help them lead better lives and deaths. This struggle between love of violence, desire to help people, and later his love of Keiko is ultimately the dynamic that will shape Yusuke as he comes back to live his life. But for now, let's pin this conversation. In chapter 15, we get the true explanation of why Koenma decided to let Yusuke back into his body. It was because they could not pin down the precise nature of his soul. The conclusion he comes to? Yusuke is geared only towards physical responses. He acts without thinking. As such, he's a total idiot. So, just leaving him as a spirit does no good, as it only measures his nature, and not how he acts when rubber meets the road. This nature versus nurture dynamic that stresses people are shaped by environmental factors is a staple of Togashi's writing, as noticed by Alexander's many excellent Hunter x Hunter videos. However, the takeaway from this is that the decision to allow Yusuke back his body was not one out of empathy for him, as was my impression from watching the anime, which treats Koenma and Yusuke as more familiar. Rather, it was a calculated one. In his body, Koenma could have Yusuke fall victim to his old habits, while still exploiting him for detective work, and then Pooh very well could have hatched and eaten him whole. It's an angle of interpretation that's much more difficult to impossible to arrive at, solely watching the anime. In that light, Koenma is little better than Yusuke's mother or teacher, just another authority figure in his life, using him to their own ends, and largely ambivalent to his future. In more ways than one, it's fair to say that Yusuke is alienated from the good life, that he protects for his fellow humans by fighting demons, alienated from his desires as a person and from his emotions. It's a clash of interests that fits in line with the story's themes, coming back to life after losing everything. As a last-minute addendum, if you look at the wording, Koenma promises that Yusuke will get back his body in one way or another. However, whether he lives or dies with the egg is another matter entirely. In that light, he's almost worse. It's this thematic richness that's lost in the anime adaptation. So, do I recommend changing it to better fit the anime? Maybe? Here's the thing, for as much as manga Koenma brings to the table in terms of tying the story together, it's just hard to imagine Yu Yu Hakusho without that lovable man-baby Koenma, commentating and sassing back of Yusuke as much as he does. Call me biased, but I enjoy both versions of Koenma, even though they contradict each other in many ways. Not only that, but it isn't as if the idea of Yusuke being used and alienated really vanishes with Koenma's role changed. It just reinforces it. In fact, when it comes time for the Chapter Black arc, one could argue that Koenma getting closer to Yusuke instead of keeping him at arm's reach, like he did Sensui, helps show the contrast and importance of connection and friendship. And that's just very shonen. I know some might be expecting a more conclusive answer to this problem, but I don't really have a solid answer here. It might be a bit of a letdown, but in my eyes, that's part of the reason it's worth doing. That a story can be so rich and well crafted, that can be viewed from two conflicting angles, that can be equally as engaging, is in my way its own reward. Alteration 4, Yoshihiro Togashi and Choice. After the content lost from the removed Spirit Detective arc, the differences in the anime and manga become a bit neglectable. Until the Dark Tournament, making placing points together here a bit difficult. However, simply shifting around scenes is not the only thing I'm limited to in enhancing our enjoyment of Togashi's works. As we understand now about our protagonist Yusuke, the story is one of him making choices about who he wants to become. But I think it's interesting to view this concept of choice in a more overarching view of his works. Choice is something that all of Togashi's main protagonists must deal with. From Yusuke to Prince Baka to Gon. The amount of options that these characters do or do not have becomes a powerful point of development in all of their arcs. And we'll use the collective knowledge of these three characters to see just how much Togashi has a tendency to come back to this idea. With the quality of Hunter x Hunter analysis that has come out in recent years, it should be no surprise that Gon may be the character most overtly centered around this idea. So Pyle almost says as much during the York New arc. Sapile extrapolates on Gon's inherent and boundless curiosity.
すごいと思ったものには善悪の区別なく称賛し心を開く。つまりこいつは危ういんだ。言うなれば目利きが全く通用しない五分の品。
Realizing that if Gon wanted to, his mindset could lead him to become a master in anything he so wished. If he became an inventor, he'd revolutionize whatever field he walked into. If he became a conservationist, his reputation alone might scare off poachers. And if Gon became a thief, he would be able to steal everything from the stars to your life. Even looking back on the Hunter exam as an arc, a huge portion of it is dedicated to exploring and presenting choices. The two-choice quiz was designed to prepare contestants for the very real moral conundrums out in the field. The second stage cooking challenge was about learning to appreciate the value in choosing the specialization you decide on. Trick Tower is perhaps the most obvious. Stage around playing with the idea of majority decision always being right. But Gon's interaction with Hanzo the ninja stands out in particular. Despite being coerced by force, Gon did not particularly get upset about the methods Hanzo used. He wanted to change the paradigm to be a fair choice for both parties, saying that despite the fact that if Hanzo seriously injured or killed him, if he lost the hope of being able to see his goal through to the end, then that's really no choice at all. Prince Baka is one of the lesser known Togashi characters, but perhaps one of the most distinct. He's an alien on the run from his princely responsibilities, and he just so happens to be a sadistic idiot that finds amusement in trolling everyone he encounters. Over the course of level E, we learn two things about him: that Prince Baka enjoys using his abilities for his own amusement, and that he refuses to be constrained. Then he gets married. A perfectly hilarious end for a comedy to be sure, but while Prince Baka was tricked into marrying his princess, he did ultimately stick around in the end. The story Full Moon in level E ends with the reveal that the princess led Baka on throughout an exciting ride that only made him think that his choices throughout the chase mattered. We can surmise from his ending line,
"You're fascinating,"
that Prince Baka came to the conclusion that his adventures will be more with his princess than without. In both cases of Baka and Gon, the most impactful moments of their story come about when they make a choice, or their actions hinge around potential choices. More so for Gon when you consider the extra level of tragedy of him throwing away all of his future for revenge against Pito, and the understanding that his Nen being reset and him being stuck at home doing homework is a true new beginning. Incidentally, being stuck at home doing homework is how Togashi completes Kuwabara's arc. So why do I mention the importance of choice in Togashi's works? In part to show how much the theme is central to his mindset, and in part to contextualize a small moment in Yusuke's behavior that people have been fixated on, and that I'm getting tired of seeing bantered around without context. That being a time where Yusuke, and to some the author by extension, is supposedly acting in a transphobic manner, just before his first encounter with Toguro in chapter 48. Yusuke, after defeating Miyuki of the Ogre Triad Vertex 1, points out that she was a cross-dresser, and after she claims that Yusuke only fought her for being different, Yusuke calls foul and says that she should make up her mind before getting into any more fights. Now, let's set aside the obvious hypocrisy that Miyuki is making in this scene, by saying that Yusuke is only attacking her because she's different, and he would act differently if she was a woman, when Miyuki is clearly a demon under the employment of an evil business tyrant, and clearly ready to kill both Yusuke and Kuwabara for no particular reason. Let's break this scene down a bit. Firstly, this scene doesn't look good in isolation, of course, and rightfully the scene could easily be cut or altered, but let's take a look at this scene as a matter of fact being not one of Yusuke's best moments at all. It's not supposed to be, and the answer to why lies in Yusuke's particular development arc and interest of Yu Yu Hakusho as a story. Yu Yu Hakusho is a story about Yusuke discovering what choices he wants to make about his life so that he can live his best life. The reason is that this scene of him calling out Miyuki is more a projection than anything, because for someone who can't make up their own mind about life, it's easier for them to call out other people on it than reconcile with that issue themselves. So in this context, is Yusuke calling out a cross-dressing person on their inadequacies because of his own unresolved issues? Well, using common sense, the answer is obviously no. Yusuke at this point is a school-aged, brash, rude, unapologetic bundle of nerves and aggression. He is not the morality center of the narrative. In fact, one of those does not exist in any of Togashi's works. Obviously, he is not going to always act in ways that are favorable. What this scene is most certainly not is transphobic. First of all, just before this scene takes place, Yusuke verbatim says,
She's a fighter and she's trying to get in our way. I don't care if she's a girl or a baby or somebody's grandmother. I'll still knock her out.
Establishing off the bat this is not a gender issue. But to even think Togashi of all authors is being transphobic for making this scene is ridiculous. It's a well-known fact that Togashi's interests include gender studies. Not only that this manifests in his work several times over, Togashi regularly creates transgender characters, or ones that transition. Alika and her story is recognized as one of the best stories about transgender and otherness acceptance. In one of the Yu Yu Hakusho volume extras, talked about his desire to create a transgender protagonist for a sports manga. One commenter even noticed that Togashi's sketch of the main character for the sports manga has a resemblance to a manga-only scene in chapter 171 of Yusuke cross-dressing to solve a mystery at Keiko's all-girls school. In my opinion, showing Yusuke is capable of moving beyond his brash younger self and making choices he'd be reluctant to make otherwise, as he begins to rekindle his relationship with Keiko, the only person who knew from the beginning Yusuke's innate potential for goodness. Given the amount of honest interest and storylines that Togashi has created about the topics of gender, it's just courteous to claim that Togashi is transphobic, and hopefully this serves as a good reminder to look at such moments of suspicion both in isolation and from broader points of view to avoid such biased interpretations. Alteration 5. Truncation of the Dark Tournament. To a certain degree, everything from the daily life arc to just before the Dark Tournament is adapted faithfully. Of course, the anime has plenty of minor alterations here and there, but for the most part all of the changes are just general extensions of fight scenes. I don't consider things that don't help or hinder the adaptation to be worth discussing. An occasional fight scene or extra banter in a scene here and there is doing what this adaptation does best, adding character to the content that is already there. As such, I don't want to spend much time commenting on things that you could pick up on yourself. However, I do think that when it comes to talking about Togashi's works, too much is more damaging than too little. Togashi as a writer is always sure to cover his bases. If you were to just adapt what is there into anime, you would have a short, punchy, and functional piece. Adding too much, however, means to a degree diluting his natural ideas and tendencies, and can ultimately counteract those themes. The Dark Tournament is long. In my opinion, it is much too long, and it suffers on rewatch. This breaks down into separate issues, the first being the quality of the fights, the second being the addition of certain character arcs that, well, they just don't work. Let's talk about the first. Most of the additions to the Dark Tournament are, as to be expected, cosmetic. Extensions on fight scenes, periods of build-up, followed by some of the most legendary animation clips of carnage you could ask for from a fighting anime. While I'm not opposed to this fundamentally, I need to stress that Yu Yu fights aren't the greatest in anime history from a technical standpoint. When Togashi wrote Yu Yu Hakusho, he hadn't developed the concept of Nen, although he showed numerous signs of establishing the basis for it. And they mostly run on pure emotion and tactics we aren't privy to the possibility of happening. Surprisingly, many moments of the fights maintain the desired effects these twists were supposed to have. But the longer you as a reader are made to spend time on the fights, the more noticeable the lack of solid ground they have. Keeping the fights short and relatively punchy, when not backed up by a strong emotional core, is what made them good in the manga. When it comes to the anime, the Dark Tournament fights get almost painfully dragged out. Of course, this is just my opinion, but I think a general culling of some of these scenes to be closer to the whole would do wonders. I won't be giving an analysis of each individual fight scene, telling what needed to be cut. That would be a job for a professional, and more importantly, it's too time-consuming. Alteration 6. There's no freedom for the sinner named Sakyo. I'm not letting this abomination slide just because it panders to people's hearts. So remember how I was just talking about too much being more damaging than too little one section ago? That comes to a head right here in the most disgusting fashion. Sakyo is established to be complete human trash, devoid of any redeeming qualities. A rich sociopath who treats life's resources, and consequences all as things just to entertain him. He's the mastermind behind much of the shady activities going on into the Dark Tournament, and his ambition to open a portal to the demon world is one of the inciting incidents that leads directly into the Chapter Black arc. In many ways, Sakyo was the perfect villain for the Dark Tournament, even more so than Toguro, because where Toguro's heart was stained by tragedy, and he never truly sold his standards for his ambitions, Sakyo was the opposite. Always inundated from the consequences of his relatively cushy life and money. His obsession with death turned him into a monster, through no one else's fault but his own. Sakyo was the worst type of person, a monster that calls himself as such. He was the perfect embodiment of evil that Sensui saw in humanity. A man with no ideals, no ambition to help anyone but for his own entertainment.
Sometimes I'd play a little game where I'd challenge myself to see how long I could keep something alive once I had carved out its heart. But in time, we all grow more mature, and realize that there's more to life than blood, guts, and minimum wage. I soon discovered that with gambling I could translate all my teenage obsessions into cold, hard cash, and there was no turning back.
So it's a damn shame that the anime attempts a slapdash effort to make him a more human, down-to-earth character, when he himself established in no uncertain terms that he's anything of the sort. The Yu Yu Hakusho anime attempts to flaccidly humanize Sakyo with two mechanisms, by vaguely alluding to the idea that Sakyo has some grander altruistic vision of a united demon and human world, and by giving him a romantic subplot. Gag me. First thing, why? Second, the line in question for Sakyo goes as such.
How do I know the plan ends with you?
Yes, you've been keeping your informants busy. And somewhere along the line you learned of my humble aspiration to dissolve the barrier between worlds, let demons of every size cross to the human side, annul the careful order your kind has enforced. I find life would be better that way, and I know one day it will be so.
And I can only wonder at this point what they are thinking in adding this line. While the justification of Spirit World's order is a discussion that the manga would eventually have, there is no way Sakyo would be privy to the issues behind the curtain that even Koenma doesn't know about. It's, as I said, an illusion, only there to raise a last-minute question. And considering that the anime would not truly follow up on this plot thread, it's also an unresolved promise. For whatever reason, the anime has an aversion to the cold and evil depiction of Sakyo Togashi intended. And that's one thing, in and of itself. But for what purpose do they have to bring Shizuru Kuwabara into this? To start with, the Dark Tournament adds numerous scenes of interactions between the girls of Yu Yu Hakusho, specifically the dynamic of Keiko, Shizuru, Yukina, and Botan. None of these happen in the manga. While it is established that the girls are present in the tournament audience, the vast majority of their antics and commentary aren't present. From this we can determine that they just wanted the girls to have more of a presence in the arc itself, which is fine, but their attempts to use Shizuru as a tool to humanize Sakyo are just as they sound. Now, I enjoy the extended scenes of the girls. Personality is what this adaptation excels at, after all. But what good is it to both build up Shizuru as a solid woman that keeps the punk Kuwabara in line, while at the same time making up some half-interesting excuses for her to project past relationships onto Sakyo? I'm left with so many questions. Least of all is why Shizuru is acting like a damsel in distress towards a man she meets no more than 4 times. Was this so we can empathize with the tragedy of Sakyo choosing to kill himself with his own ambitions? Well, again, and I cannot stress this enough, and today more than ever, rich evil bastards like Sakyo do not deserve empathy. They don't need to be given any sort of sympathy when the life of evil they choose is entirely their own, and Sakyo admits as much himself. Not only was this an unneeded addition to the watch time that everyone would be better without, but it signals a sharp divergence from the inherent misanthropic core at the heart of many of Togashi's ideas. What I can only suspect compelling the appalling changes was that they wanted to further push the more romantic angles of Yu Yu Hakusho by having one of the other female characters find some sort of love. What I don't understand is if they wanted to have a scorned woman archetype going through the arc of overcoming alienation to find connection, why use Shizuru of all people when Yusuke's mother is perfectly available for this task? And that's another thing I didn't touch about this entire arc. But Yusuke's mom is just in the stands in the manga, along with Shizuru and the rest. She gets no less page time than Shizuru, more in fact. And at the end of the manga, we get to see her chatting up with Yusuke's piece of garbage father. By the way, Yusuke has a dad. Cut all this Sakyo and Shizuru business out, and don't turn back. Alteration 7. Yusuke saves Pooh. There are some scenes that I find it hard to reasonably do without in Yu Yu Hakusho, so much so that I think they're easily viewable on their own, without the need to watch the entire arc back again for them, but less so because they signify emotional or spectacle impact, and more because they're natural extensions of the character arcs. Do I really need several minute-long scenes of he amping himself up for the Dragon of Darkness flame? Strictly speaking, no. Is it welcome? Yeah. Yusuke saving Pooh, however, I always found to be one of the most transcendent moments of the anime, in part because of the metaphorical role Pooh plays in this, being a representation of Yusuke. The ideal shonen protagonist is someone both entirely selfish and completely selfless, with no contradiction between such dynamics. These characters have enough greed and personal motivation to keep themselves going, while also understanding the higher nature of generosity and friendship. Yusuke's constant struggle for self-determination, while also coming to terms with the fact that he isn't capable of becoming a heartless brute like Toguro, or alternatively a sadistic capitalist like Sakyo, is the dynamic that exemplifies this sort of struggle between extremes. Pooh himself is unique because he can be seen both as Yusuke himself, but because he is an entity set apart from Yusuke, someone else. Either way you choose to look at it, it's a great moment for Yusuke to save Pooh in the cave, both as an act of selfless heroism and a desire to improve himself for his own well-being. The music kicks all kind of ass too. So that wraps up the Dark Tournament. See, this video could probably be twice as long, but being nitpicky like saying this anime original fight in the tournament should be cut is really outside of the scope of this video. So I was suggesting alterations for Chapter Black, since it's just such a solid arc, and my personal favorite. No bias here. If you want to hear more about this arc, this channel has a separate video on the central conflict between Yusuke and Sensui. That is definitely worth your time. From written pieces by Togashi, it becomes clear he wanted to end the Yu Yu Hakusho manga around the time he was drawing the Yusuke and Sensui fight. More on the details of Togashi ending serialization in a bit, because I prefer to ramble about the nature of ending fictional stories, as this video transitions into discussing the Three Kings arc. See, there aren't many authors as honest about ending their stories like Togashi is. Togashi prefers to end stories on his terms, rather than let entities like Shonen Jump milk his properties for all their worth. Recently, he even leaked a potential ending for Hunter x Hunter, and hinted he had several more endings already written down, all with different levels of reader satisfaction that Togashi thinks the reception would be of each ending, which really makes one wonder, what level of satisfaction did Togashi believe the Three Kings arc would leave readers? On one hand, I see a lot of Yu Yu Hakusho fans hate how abrupt this arc ends, but on the other hand, this ending still wraps things up for every character rather tightly. This is just a guess, and I'd like some of your input in the comments, but perhaps the satisfaction is close to a 50-50 split. Many fans were dissatisfied with how many of the shonen fights got resolved off-screen, like the manga fight of Yusuke vs Yomi, which were just told the result after it happened, and the general quick pace of everything. But another portion of fans were left satisfied that Togashi stuck to enriching the thematic elements of Yu Yu Hakusho till the very end. Keep this in mind, because I'm in the latter camp, as we address what needs to be altered about the Three Kings arc. Also, I'm just generally interested if this last part of the video will change anybody's perspectives on this final arc. So make sure to leave your comments, and while I have your attention, please like and subscribe. Thanks. All great things come in threes, including kings apparently. Alteration 8. Pacing. The Three Kings arc is 21 chapters in the manga and 18 episodes in the anime, giving adaptation rate of about 1.1 chapters per episode, which in layman's terms means that the pacing is about the same as always, which wouldn't be worth mentioning if we weren't about to address the last and arguably most important arc in Yu Yu Hakusho, and how it came to be. Of course, no serious analysis of the Three Kings arc can begin without addressing the elephant in the room, Togashi's on-finishing serialization of Yu Yu Hakusho, looking back on failure. @Minoski's article made the definitive Twitter thread in the topic, so I will just be quoting them. For perspective, Togashi worked on Yu Yu Hakusho from 24 to 27. He ended it because the physical, mental, and emotional strain. Deadlines killed his interest in going any further. Here, Togashi calls himself selfish, because despite knowing the standards Shonen Jump expected, he still wanted to draw manga on his own terms. This meant in practice drawing art to attract others by himself, deconstructing the characters instead of repeating the same beats over and over, and maintaining a healthy work-life balance, none of which were allowed by the time he wrote the final arc and chapter of Yu Yu Hakusho. What this all says to me is that Togashi is a man who above all admires skill, liberty, and most of all, compassion, all of which are reflected in this last arc, and indeed through his works in totality. Therefore, understand that when I criticize all that is left out of the anime, it is not because I believe the manga to be far and away superior just because it has these things. The presentation, and especially the slower pace of the anime that fleshes out the Demon World Tournament, do wonders for giving us a sense of safety or predictability going forward, so that the ending doesn't feel as abrupt. On the other hand, however, without what is contained in the manga, the anime ends up suffering from a lack of thematic depth that can't otherwise be found in any other arc, due to the rest of the text's sole focus on Yusuke. In short, while the anime has pacing to match an arc that will give the series the same level of complexity that Yusuke himself has, something the manga lacks, it in turn lacks that very content found in the manga that makes complexity possible. A tragedy if there ever was one. Alteration 9. Mukuro's backstory. Kuwabara and Yusuke's dads. Koenma overthrowing King Yama. Let's review. The central reoccurring theme which pervades the entire work of Yu Yu Hakusho is what it means to come back to your life after losing everything. So far we have seen this theme examined through the story mainly through Yusuke and the adversaries he has faced, whether that be society, demons, humans who have turned into demons, or humans who think society is the true demon. Now at last with the Three Kings, the final arc in the series, we begin to seriously explore this theme via two other central characters. Kurama, and Hiei. With this understanding in mind, it should become clear what needs to be inserted from the manga into the anime to see it truly complete. Hiei's lover must be expanded upon, and yes, they are love interest, which will serve as a final parallel to Yusuke. Yusuke had a quaint desire to help people, which was in conflict with both his love for Keiko and love of violence, which represented self-love and self-development respectively. Much like how Yusuke's desire to help others only became the most prominent part of his character in the daily life arc, when he didn't have a body, magic through the Tear Stone was also needed to finally have Hiei explicitly connect with another. This serves as the final parallel and foil between these two characters. Whereas Yusuke's story started off with the conflict between his desires being exposed through a supernatural trial, Hiei's desires all finally aligned, as he's able to fight for his woman to protect and bring order to the demon world, allowing for open expression of both self-love and love for others, to be embodied through his development as a fighter. In order to finish fulfilling his role as a foil, Hiei needed a love interest of his own. Given how Hiei is, it takes a very interesting woman indeed to grab his attention. And if we don't feel like he would generally share a bond with this person, the whole project falls flat. I understand why they had to censor Mukuro's backstory of being abused given its graphic nature, but this censorship generally hurts the art, as we can't know why Hiei so respects her resolve to keep on living, and in her own way enjoy life. In contrast with the ice apparitions, if we don't know the details of exactly why she had every right to give up on it. Like, it really is insane here how much the anime cut out. It was shown it happened canonically in an OVA of the anime, but it skipped over how Hiei revealed Mukuro's abuser had planted false images in her mind to act as a safeguard from her seeking revenge. It is also just so in character for Hiei to give her that monster being eaten by one of Kurama's plant parasites. We're really missing out on one of anime's best stories of overcoming abuse and trauma here, only really topped by Togashi eventually creating the character Killa, in my opinion. Moving on, we've already established that the expansion of Kurama's story in the anime is top-notch, so I'm just going to insert a short part of that video here. When Kurama finds himself invited to Yomi City, he also finds himself acting more and more like the person he had left behind, more like Yoko. While Kurama was never a stranger to acting malicious and devious throughout the series, it always came with a real degree of tension. The difference then was that his rowdy group of friends was always there to ground him back, inside his life of Shuichi Minamino, or Kurama, as opposed to Yoko Kurama. Now in the demon world, surrounded by enemies, threatening his well-being as well as his family's, there's little stopping him from slowly reverting back to Yoko Kurama. He needed to do it to survive, much the same way he had to repeatedly call on his former life powers and ruthlessness to survive the Dark Tournament arc, and Sensui. Now I'd like to break from this and come back around to Shigure, the samurai who Hiei told his life story to, and also taught him swordsmanship. In truth, the anime mostly pulled Shigure out of a rabbit's hat and awkwardly grafted samurai aesthetics onto the character. In the manga, after Shigure gets his head lopped off by Hiei, he doesn't really come back, barring one scene in the very end, where he's talking about how soft Mukuro has become. In the anime, however, Shigure takes an active role in the tournament for the next Demon World King, and ends up fighting Kurama. Kurama, having been forced to rely on Yoko's mindset and power more than once, is reluctant to keep using it, as he remembers his life and his friends as Shuichi Minamino. And it's in this struggle that grafting the aesthetics of a swordsman who wants to win proudly onto Shigure and having him fight Kurama transform this entirely anime original fight into one of the most memorable battles in anime history. Kurama wins the fight not just through claiming his power as his own, using the seeds he planted so long ago. He wins by finally accepting himself, not just by letting go of his past, but by choosing his future as Kurama, as Shuichi Minamino, and not Yoko Kurama. It's through choosing the things he's come to love in his human life that he finds his self-worth, finally content, knowing that he's chosen his own way of living. As the cherry blossoms, signifying the fleeting nature of life and death, fall around them, Shigure offers Kurama a piece of advice.
I must admit, these are some of the most beautiful flowers I've ever seen.
Yes.
Cherish them.
Shigure, what are you doing?
A true swordsman can never lose twice. This is the only way.
Shigure loses and commits an honorable death of his own accord, because for him, that's what his life entails, drawing both his life and Kurama's arc to a close. Basically, while a great addition showing how resolute Kurama is in embracing his new life, protecting his friends and family, I think completing each of the main cast arcs could have improved upon further had we the contrast of Yusuke's and Kuwabara's dads, an important element to the closure of the manga that the anime just ignored entirely. Allow me to explain. The first thing to note is that the process of taking in a story, be it reading a book, watching a show, etc., is not a single experience. Initially, one must become invested in consuming the story, and suspense of disbelief plays a huge role in that. Curiosity, anticipation, surprise. All these emotions can be stimulated to make a viewer or reader choose to put aside inhibitions and consume a fictional work. Because of this, there are some things that can be spoiled, generally speaking, without anyone making too much of a fuss about it, so long as that knowledge doesn't mitigate or even strengthen these emotions. We must ask why then? Did Togashi not even hint at the idea of bringing these fathers into the story till the very end? Was he just trying to achieve closure for anyone wondering what they would look like and be like? Perhaps, but Togashi certainly isn't a man who takes meaningless actions, and I believe their inclusion served a greater purpose, to serve as foils for the fully developed Yusuke and Kuwabara. Yusuke's father went with the flow, only to develop some sense of responsibility, while Kuwabara's father is very similar to his son, and thus serves as a cautionary tale for him, should he link up with Yukina. Whether you're opposed to this ship or not, the manga establishes what the future outlook of human-demon relations will be going forward, full of potential strife and prejudice, but very much capable of being as wholesome as the Kuwabara and Yukina pair. Also, Kuwabara's dad just happens to know everything that happens in the spirit realm. He's just too cool. We need more expansion on his character, please. Not less, limited to his 2018 Yu Yu Hakusho OVA. Please, for the love of King Koenma. Finally, there's the simple matter of keeping the fact that Koenma usurps his father King Yama. First of all, this is probably one of the most politically intriguing things that happens in the manga, in general, and it happens in the space of like only 2 pages of text panels. So let me read a few. Koenma is able to pull up evidence that King Yama brainwashed Class D demons and had used them to commit crimes, using this to justify protecting the human world. And King Yama insisted on the forced separation of the 2 realms. My favorite tidbit here that was left out of the anime is that Sensui had a W here. By stealing Chapter Black, he became the whistleblower on this whole thing. So it's only because of Sensui this coup could happen in the first place. So not only does Sensui accomplish this goal, albeit through better means than his original intentions, removing this barrier had also been Raizen's idea from the very beginning, to see an age come to fruition, where people can come and go freely through all of the living realms. Second, it helps address the lack of politics in the arc that some mistakenly view as a flaw. To put it bluntly, people who wanted a war arc from the stories are fools. As established, the main theme of Yu Yu Hakusho is coming back to life after death, and more specifically, when it comes to the villain of each arc. The message was that they didn't understand that, to quote Yukina,
"If the only way our ice world can survive is for our people to freeze their hearts, well then, they don't deserve to survive. That's how I feel."
Yomi's abandonment of his hot-bloodedness must be shown to have been an error if the themes were to remain consistent. A war arc of political intrigue where contestants must make raw political calculations and dampen their emotions would have done the complete opposite of that. On the other hand, Koenma's coup serves as either character development that reinforces this theme, if we go with the anime version of this character, going from immature and reactive to proactive and embracing his own hot-bloodedness, or a final reminder that while certainly progress can perhaps be made, Koenma must always be suspected if we're going with the manga version of the character. A final warning against consistently purely cold calculation, whether looked at from a pessimistic or optimistic lens. And truly, does that not represent Togashi perfectly?